Hey man,
What's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm good, loving the beard.
Thanks. This is my quarantine beard.
The perpetual quarantine.
Haven't shaved it. I
Yeah,
figured, I can't grow facial hair in general, so to have it the opportunity to grow it, when I don't really have to see too many people, what better time?
yeah,
Great seeing you.
yeah. Great to see you, man. It's been a while.
It has been a minute. Yeah, for sure. How's everything? What is new with you?
Um, Not much, I guess. Terribly new. Let's see. I've been sort of dabbling at writing something. I'm going to an Alice Cooper show tomorrow night.
Awesome.
With Nick. Um,
I saw him in Charlotte. He opened for Iron Maiden
oh,
uh,
okay,
like 10 years ago.
nice. I
Great theatrical show.
Yeah, Nick was telling me he was like you don't have to give a shit about Alice Cooper music.
Nope.
He was like it's just going to be a performance. He's like it's a legend that you'll get to see live and it's a time.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
he's crazy. When I saw him, he had on like he brought out like a guillotine and all kinds of weird shit. And it was a wild ride. I wasn't even drinking that night. And I should have been.
Oh god.
Yeah. You'll have a blast.
Yeah, I'm sure. But yeah, that's pretty much all that's like going on my end. What's going on with you, man?
Just working, man. That's pretty much it. Like I have the three jobs right now. Um so it's a lot of work. I also have a lot of downtime though, not even gonna lie. You know, but when I'm working, like
It's
I'm
on.
pretty focused on what I'm
Yeah.
doing. So the downtime really is to kind of like decompress a little bit. Uh but you know, and the three gigs, I mean, they're pretty simple, but one of them really just kind of takes over mentally
Hmm.
because it's more creative. But everything else is pretty solid and coming up with lesson plans.
Hmm.
Just trying to figure that kind of stuff out because first semester teaching really it's an art skill to I think lesson planning that
Yeah.
I don't think students recognize as for teachers and instructors. So that's it though.
Okay. What's the official name of your class?
We have video editing at
Okay.
Winston-Salem State, and then the other one that I'm teaching assisting for is the developmental process. So
Okay.
that's more screenwriting.
Okay. I was about to say developmental process. I was like, are we talking like, in terms of pre-production and that kind of thing? So,
It's a grad level screenwriting and producing course. So it's 8 screenwriters and like 9 producers, just because that's how it worked out with enrollment this year. And they come up with ideas, they pitch those ideas, they write treatments for ideas. And by the end of the semester, their goal is to come up with a solid treatment
okay.
for an idea that they have.
Nice. Not bad.
Yeah. So going through the program, it's kind of interesting to see it from, the student perspective and now seeing it from fresh eyes, where it's like, oh, I did this 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So
Hey there, film buds. Welcome back to the Film Buds podcast. I'm your host, Paul, and I'm joined with recurring friend of the show, Sky Tilly. Sky, how are you?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I can't remember exactly what the last episode was that you were on.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't. I want to say, was it Tenet? Was it a Christopher Nolan
It might have
session?
been. That sounds right-ish.
It may have been. It may have been Dunkirk. I don't know. Uh,
Or maybe we just ended up talking about Christopher Nolan just in general.
yeah, and probably my complete and utter disdain for
Late
Dunkirk
stage,
and Tenet. But
yeah, late stage Nolan.
yeah, it's just so depressing. But yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, it's great to have you back on. I was planning out a horror month and I was like, I should have some special guests in. Um, and one of the first people that came to mind was you.
Oh,
Um,
great.
and so I thought that this would be a particularly good one as well because it's James Gunn, it's Zack Snyder, and it's it's remakes, and I thought that it could be a good place for you to show some of your excellent skills.
Oh, don't hype it up too much. They're very minimal.
Sky, we can't say that. You're a teacher. He's excellent, I promise. Your education is worth every time.
The education is great. It's the user error, I think, is really where it's
okay.
down to.
But no, I'm super ready to talk about this. We're talking about, of course, Dawn of the Dead from 1978 and Dawn of the Dead from 2004, the Romero and the Zack Snyder versions.
Yeah.
One is considered like the greatest zombie film of all time, and then the other one is considered by many to be one of the best remakes, just in general, but especially in the horror genre. So I thought that would be good to go in and take apart, especially since he recently has returned to the horror genre, Snyder. I thought that would be good to go back and look at his zombie roots and also do a follow-up to our own episode on Night of the Living Dead that we did a little while ago.
Yeah.
So hopefully this is a good episode for y'all. Actually, this is essentially like a sequel episode to the last two that we did, because we did like Night of the Living Dead and then we did Army of the Dead. And so now here we are and we're doing Dawn and Dawn. So
I'm curious. I'll have to go back and listen to the Army of the Dead segment.
I'll give you a spoiler. I hate it.
Okay. Okay, we're in the same boat. It was
okay.
I think, we're going to talk about this, I'm sure, but he needed a James Gunn script.
Yeah.
I think he was lost without that. So
yeah, desperate need of a solid script.
Yeah,
on that.
Great ideas, great, tremendous ideas, action packed. A
lot of failed execution on some of those ideas. A lot of build it up and where'd it go?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree.
But no, this movie is very different than that movie, and it'll be a lot of fun to talk about. So let's get into it, and we'll start chronologically with George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. And as always, we have a clip, so take a listen.
In 1968, George Romero brought us Night of the Living Dead. It became the classic horror film of its time.
Not that room! Not that room!
Now, George Romero brings us the most intensely shocking motion picture experience for all times.
It gets up and kills. The people it kills get up and kill. This situation must be controlled before it's too late. They are multiplying too rapidly.
Dawn of the Dead.
So that was Dawn of the Dead, as I said, directed by George Romero, written by George Romero, and it stars David Emge, Ken Foree, Scott H. Reininger, Galen Ross, and also, of course, its own special effects makeup person, Tom Savini.
Mm-hmm.
And the premise is following an ever-growing epidemic of zombies that have risen from the dead, two Philadelphia SWAT team members, a traffic reporter, and his television executive girlfriend seek refuge in a secluded shopping mall. Sky, since you are since you're the guest, why don't you start us out?
So, this movie was impossible to track down, or I thought. It was actually very simple. But if you're trying to find it legally, like on any sort of streaming service, or to just purchase the DVD, apparently there's something wrong with like distribution. There's some kind of issues. I haven't read too much into it, but it's near impossible to find.
Mm-hmm.
But fortunately, I reached out to you and I was like, I want to watch this movie again because I hadn't seen it since I was a kid, and I can't find it. And you told me it was on YouTube. So shout out to YouTube for that.
Yeah.
And there's like 3 different versions on YouTube. There's one that's like an extended cut with like 2.5 hours long. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. But I watched the regular 2 hours and 9 minute cut of the film, entirely too long. You know, I figure the greatest horror zombie film of all time should be a nice 90-minute cut of a film. This was just, it was so long. And I'm not saying that it was bad. I'm just saying that by today's standards, I've been conditioned, like all audience viewers, that anything over 2 hours is just too long. And for a horror movie in general, like you got to get that 90, 95-minute, maybe even 100 minutes. And past that, you start to lose interest.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a little long, but the nostalgic of it was great. I remembered certain scenes from when I was a kid, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. And specifically the towards the end in the third act when the biker gang comes up, and I was like, oh, there's Tom Savini. So what I did, though, kind of backtracking, was I watched this movie not in terms of quality, because, you know, like I said, we've been conditioned. We've seen zombie films, we've seen zombie shows, we understand the genre by this point. It was a blast for that time. For 1978 standards, insane quality. You know, great stuff that they did. Thematically, I think it works on a lot of levels, probably even better than the remake. Some of the stuff that they really have time to dig into, because again, there's so much time in this movie. You do get to spend a lot of time with these characters, and you get to see what they're doing in this kind of world that's inhabited by zombies now. And that was very interesting. You know, but now as modern day audience members, we love character development. We love to get attached to these characters. And unfortunately for me, I was unable to attach myself to any character in the 1978 version. I had no interest if they lived or died. Didn't care. And I think that was just a product of the time. Like they didn't really focus on that. They focused more on shock value and look at this horror that we're seeing. You know, great ideas, especially with like all the bodies that we're seeing, and they're just collectively moving them and disposing of them. And it did remind me a little bit, I think I sent you a text, of Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13 that came out 2 years prior, especially with like so many instances of characters just going crazy, and you know, the shocking nature of what you would be seeing in 1978.
No, for sure. So first off, I realized a few things about my watching of it. I definitely understand where you're coming from. I ended up really enjoying it. I actually watched the 2-hour and 34-minute version of the movie. So let me tell you, yeah, it's and you know, it's long. Like you definitely you feel that 2.5 hours undoubtedly, but I almost on a certain level loved that, because there were like very extended sequence of just monotony, beyond all monotony. And you really just dug in and watched these people just sort of live in this mall in that 2.5 hour version for a really long time. And I found it fascinating. It suddenly diverted so much away from being what I had expected from a zombie movie that I was like, no, I think I like it.
Hey, there you go.
But I really enjoyed it. I think that it definitely is a thematically much richer movie than the remake is, and we can talk more about that when we talk about the remake. But in this movie, you've got obviously the consumerism of it at play.
Right.
I think to a certain degree, you get kind of a little bit of, I think you could make an argument either way, with the one cop that kind of, you know, goes a little bit nuts. He's either a little bit of sort of a Vietnam sort of allegorical figure, you know, this guy who's almost a little bit numb to it, to the point that he goes a little bit nuts. And then obviously I think when they're injecting him with morphine and stuff like that at the end, and he just looks strung out, literally, it's very obviously like a heroin sort of metaphor going on.
Right.
So this movie has a much, I think, richer tone to it than the new one, and like the married couple you watch, or not the married couple, but the couple that, you know, has this child together on the way, you watch
Mhm.
them just drift apart, and
Yeah.
neither of them are necessarily good people.
Right.
You know,
Right.
the only one that's maybe kind of interesting for me that I did like feel compelled for was Peter.
Yeah.
And I actually was really hoping at the end that he wasn't, spoiler alert, but it's from '78, so whatever. If
You
you
hadn't seen it by now. It's your fault.
yeah. So is I really thought that Peter was about to either do one of two things: kill himself, or let her go away, kill all the zombies in there, and become like the weird hermit of them all. And I was
Yeah.
really in favor of him becoming the weird hermit of them all.
Oh, here's another one. I know this we're not talking about it right now, but what if he became Andy from
Ah,
from the remake? That would have been pretty dope.
no, that would have been nice. But for the most part, I really enjoyed it. I definitely understand there's a distance to these characters. They're not necessarily like enjoyable people. I'm not sure I would want to be trapped in a mall with these people. And so
Right.
that certainly does make like the engagement of the journey with them, I think, like a hard thing, to your point. But you're right, when it is fun, it is a fun movie.
Hmm.
Like when the gore kicks in, when the violence is going on, and like when it's firing on those cylinders, it's great. The police raid scene is pure chaos.
Insane. It's
Um,
crazy.
and I had no idea. The second thing that I realized about this movie while I was watching it was that I had only ever seen this movie from a certain point into it onward.
Right.
And so when it started with the scene of the news reporters, and then we went to the raid scene, I was like, the fuck movie? How have I
It's two
missed
different
this
movies.
part of the movie?
I had to stop. I was like, someone's fucking with me on YouTube right now. This isn't legit. Like, this is another movie.
Oh no, I had the same thought. I was like, I guess this is how it starts, because like I went and I looked at the cast and I was like, no, like this is them. These are the people. This is the movie. So
Yeah.
I guess we got to get into it. And so then I suddenly realized that I've only ever caught it from like almost an hour into this thing. And that's
When they
also
are at the mall.
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And that's also probably why I remembered this movie as definitely being like a brisker film
Hmm.
than it
Yeah, because you
actually
cut
is.
off 45 minutes.
And
I
it's a
mean,
great 45, but it's just
yeah.
so a different movie.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
even like color palette wise, that first
Mhm.
scene, it really doesn't even match tonally to the raid scene.
No.
You know, it really does feel like two different productions.
Well, and honestly, throughout the whole film, and this is probably because, you know, it was a cheap film made, you know, like
Mhm.
it was produced by an Italian company and Romero's own company.
Yeah.
So not like a huge budget. I think it literally was like $1 million or something like that.
Yeah.
And they were shooting in the mall like after hours, because it was, I think, the mall that like Romero knew the people of.
I wonder if
Um,
he told them about like his plans towards the third act. I'm gonna
I
have
don't
a
know, but
biker
I
gang
was
right through your mall.
apparently I was reading up on the history of this movie. You know, I like to do research, and first of all, I have 4 books that I thought would surely have something on Romero. Only one of them did, and it was to reference how this film was a part of Dario Argento's plan to create a series of zombie films and market them in Italy.
Yeah,
And that was the only reference to Romero or Dawn of the Dead in 4 different books that I looked in.
that's wild.
Um,
Yeah, I
so
knew he had plans with Argento
Mhm.
because obviously, you know, Argento was kind of, you know, another king during that time.
Yeah.
So,
And I do know that apparently some of the zombies liked to get a load on at the bar that was actively in the mall, because they would get there at 7 and the mall would close at 9, and that's when they would start recording. And the zombies would go and like get makeup on and stuff like that, and then they would go and drink at the bar. And apparently there was one time where a group of zombies crashed with a load on, crashed a golf cart into a column and caused
oh my God,
$7,000 worth of damage in the mall.
that's the most expensive extra in movie history.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a little fun fact for you. But this movie was just sort of like a little bit of an insane ride. Like, how it got made was definitely, you know, that weird. It was a Romero flick. You know, it was a who's who of Romero people behind the camera, and then it was a group of people who had some acting experience. The main woman had no acting experience at all. She had never professionally acted before.
Wow.
And they were doing just all kinds of crazy shit to make this movie. The head explosion scene in the raid scene, they actually shot the prosthetic head with a real shotgun. Tom Savini fired a real shotgun at that thing to make it blow up. And everyone in the cast was like, I don't know why they're making this movie. It's never going to get released in America. Like, no one in America is going to see it. So it was a pretty wild, to your point, it was a wild and shocking film, but definitely by like modern standards, it is, you know, not at all what people think of when they think of, I'm going to sit down and watch a zombie movie.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You know, I was reading up on it a little bit too. He waited 10 years to make this film with the intent, because he didn't want people to think of him just as the horror guy, which is kind of ironic because he is the horror guy. He's the zombie horror guy. So kind of interested, I guess, a little bit what he may have done within that 10 years if he had just made up his mind and been like, I'm okay with being known as this kind of guy.
Yeah. He talks briefly, he went and he made Season of the Witch right after Night of the Living Dead, and then after that he made The Crazies, the original Crazies.
Yeah, that's right, he did do The Crazies.
And neither of them went anywhere at all. They both were completely DOA, and so he just ended up like going back to doing sort of like commercial work, which is what he had been doing, and then eventually he ended up shooting a movie, Martin.
Yeah, that's right. I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
And it was during Martin that someone got him talking to Dario Argento, and he pitched the idea of Dawn of the Dead, this mall-based movie, and Dario Argento flew him and I think his assistant director and I think his wife as well to Italy, and George would sit and write pages, and every few days a translator would come and take the pages and translate them into Italian and give them to Dario, and he would read them, and then they would go out to dinner, and George and Dario would have like a very stilted conversation about the script and the story and the movie and things like that. But Dario Argento, according to him at least, and Romero, didn't really give a lot of input, didn't really give a lot of notes. He was just like, yeah, it's good.
Throw some blues in there. Throw some lighting. Throw some blue lighting in there.
Can you make the music louder and more awful?
Yeah, we want more strings.
Yeah. More like you don't ever want to listen to it outside of the context of the movie.
Yeah. The music in this film was nuts. It was so jarring in comparison to what you're seeing. It's almost kind of like poking fun of itself, you know, like.
There's a quote that I found of him where he said, it's comic book stuff. If I could have, I'd have put like the pow and the zap and the zowie like in there.
Yeah.
And he said, I wanted it to be cowboys and aliens with like throwing pies. And that's part of the reason that he puts the literal pie throwing scene in there, is because for him, this was partially just like wickedly ghoulish fun.
Yeah. And it really kind of like nails in the idea that zombies aren't really the problem. It's society, and it's people, it's your neighbor, it's the person who you don't really know. They're the problem. And there's a person in the movie that when I watched it, and he said something along the lines of, and I'm going to be terribly misquoting here, that the smart ones are already dead and the dumb ones are still alive. And I was like, oh, that's going to tie in later. And sure enough, it really did. Yeah.
No, and you know, it's during that raid sequence when they also were pieing the zombies that you get the sense of obviously the true consumerism message at play, which is, you know, like suburban America having all of this excess that they just sort of keep to themselves quietly. And then an element comes and they do keep it to themselves, and then that group comes in, but also that group doesn't come in and just take what they need or what's
Right.
reasonable in an apocalypse. They go and they start stealing the rings, and they start truly like just raiding and looting. But then also the suburban dude is like, oh, I gotta stand my ground and go to war for this, and
Right.
it really lands at home, like right in those final
Yeah.
moments.
Yeah, one of the best shots I thought was when one of the biker gang members comes over and he starts stealing the jewels from the zombie.
Mhm.
And she died with them on, and now someone else is just taking them away.
Yeah, ripping them off of her. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool imagery in that movie for sure. Really had a blast with it. Did not kind of went into it, knowing the history of it and being like, okay, this is a cult classic. People adore this film. Trying to get into that kind of headspace. And like I said, I completely understand.
Yeah.
For that time and why it still resonates with people.
No, absolutely. It definitely still hit hard for me. We recently watched Night of the Living Dead. And by the way, after watching this, I call absolute bullshit that he didn't have race in his mind when he made Night of the Living Dead, because race is way too also at the front of this movie's themes
Right.
as well, for you to then not have it in your previous one.
Yeah, I think it's bullshit. You can call it immediately when you have an African-American actor as your lead hero in 1968 and then again in 1978. He is the badass. He is the guy that we're following. He's the voice of reason. He is your moral compass.
Yeah.
And you're going to say that your first film had nothing to do with racism? Don't believe you.
Yeah. I'm going to have to call bullshit. But no, so watching this, it was just as impactful as Night of the Living Dead is, but in its own much more gruesome, much more visceral way. But it also does have this wild abandon and whimsy and fun that you definitely see echoed in later generations of horror filmmakers that see how you can have both, all of the serious thematic content that you want, and you can also make people go, that was gross and fucking cool.
Yeah.
But it also is definitely not, fair warning, it is not for like modern sensibilities. So, if you're not up for something on the slower side, then maybe not for you.
If you're not up for a 2.5 hour long zombie film,
do it. Do the 2.5 hour one. Lean into it. That's the mistake of the 2 hour 9 minute one. It's just longer past the hour and a half mark. That it shows how long it is, but it doesn't then just make you go, well, I'll just settle into this, I guess.
Yeah. Some of the interesting things that I saw too was with Night of the Living Dead, you have Barbara, the lead actress. She's so helpless in that movie. She does absolutely nothing throughout that movie. And then with this one, we have our female protagonist. She pretty much does absolutely nothing. And there's actually a line in there too where she's like, I would have made you boys breakfast if I had my pots and pans. And I was like, oh God, this is what we're doing right now. I get it's 1978, but oh my goodness. And then later she actually redeems herself by saying, I'm not your mom. I'm not your housewife. I'm not your maid. This is not what I'm doing. And I was like, oh, okay. So I don't know where we're going with her now. But I just thought it was very interesting the way that he handled racism, but I don't think he did a really great job of handling sexism.
No. Well, and if you watch the behind the scenes stuff, which you can also find in places online, she talks about how he wanted her to like do this big scream, and she was like, no. And he was like, why not? And she was like, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to be this screaming woman. And, and I'm not going to fall down, and I'm not going to like ballyhoo and cry. And apparently like Romero was really like, wow, And so I think that it probably ends up not getting handled as well, but being there because it's just kind of hitting him for the first time on a certain level.
Right. Exactly. And I mean, it was for the time, for sure. But, you know, towards the beginning when you have Steven, the flyboy, I think is what he's called. He's on the ground. There's a zombie on top of him, and he's reaching for a hammer. And then she's over there in the background, and she's like looking at trees. She's looking at birds flying overhead, and I'm like, "Go get the hammer! What are we doing?"
Yeah, just grab the hammer, chuck it to him.
You got to reset. You got to reset your brain and really kind of put yourself in the theater in 1978 to watch this.
Yeah, for sure. And that's also, you know, recommendations that we've made for some other films, like MASH is one that I've often said, like, you have to think of it definitely in the context of when you're watching it as well.
Yeah, and like you said too, I mean, it really was like in parts an allegory for the Vietnam War, you know, especially with the PTSD of him going crazy, which was a very, that is an annoying scene because he's just screaming at the top of his lungs for 5 minutes. And I'm like, just die already.
Yeah.
You know, but it made, like I said, I mean, it makes sense in the context of this is a metaphor. This is, you know, about the Vietnam War. And I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So out of 5, what would you give it?
By today's standards or by 1978 standards? Because I think they're different. I think you can do both.
Yeah, let's do both.
For 1978, for all the stuff that it managed to do, I think it would probably be like a 4.5.
Okay.
What about you?
For 78, I think if you could get past the, you know, the gore of it, I'd probably give it a 5. Yeah. I think it probably would have blown my mind pretty like wide open, you know, seeing some crazy shit like this back in 78. What about
because I mean, really what we had was Psycho, we had Last House on the Left by Wes Craven,
Texas Chainsaw
Massacre by Tobe Hooper. Like, you know, it was still very shocking for the time, and it did some stuff that was very new. So yeah, I think 4.5 or 5. I definitely agree with that. And then for today's standards, just because we've seen so much and people have been so conditioned to the newer zombies and things like that, I would probably say maybe a 3, a solid 3.
Okay.
It's nothing that I really care to go back and maybe rewatch.
Okay. I'm going to give it, I think that if you can get into the groove of it as a modern audience member, I think that you'll still find it worthwhile. And I think that you can give it a 4 if you can get into the groove of it.
Yeah. No, that's fair. If you can get into the groove.
If.
You know, it's just, it would have been a much better experience for me if they cut off 30 minutes.
If we just started at the mall.
30 minutes long, start at the mall. Don't care how these people know each other. They just know each other. They're surviving.
They're all in the helicopter.
Their goal is to live in this society. And then the obstacle comes up, the biker gang. What are we going to do? Perfect.
Well, I mean, you know, you want to talk about like a great example of, even though I love the movie, you want to talk about a great example of like a fluff scene that's just for the gag, is the chopping off of the helicopter blades of the zombie head.
Yep.
That whole scene really doesn't serve the plot in any particular way. Doesn't really move anything forward.
To have a good time.
Yeah, to do the zombie kids that we shoot up and you know, chop off the head of this zombie. And
it was a popcorn flick to get teenagers' butts in seats, and it worked. It did a great job.
Yeah. No, I think that's all really fair. I do know why it is in rights issues, if you're curious.
I am very curious.
So apparently the international rights, I think, are still tied up with like Argento's company and that kind of thing, which I think partially complicates it. The other thing is that domestically, I think all of the rights are held, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm understanding this all correctly, by the producer, Richard Rubenstein. And apparently he was working on, at some point, re-releasing Dawn of the Dead in 3D for a modern audience. And it ended up not really working, and he's ran into like a lot of issues with it, but apparently he's holding on to it and holding on to the rights hoping that he can finally in some way use this Dawn of the Dead 3D in some way, because rumor has it, word around the campfire, not sure how true this is, so grain of salt, that he's like 6 million deep on doing this 3D project, and that he wants to try and recoup something from it.
Nope. Not gonna happen. Not gonna happen. You can't wait nearly 50 years for something like that. And where is the 3D moments? Where do those take place?
Yeah. Unless you're going to use it in some kind of really revolutionary way to add tremendous depth to this thing that makes it just a visually interesting presentation to try and make it feel more
Team up with James
isolated.
Cameron.
But like, you're also just not going to get, I think, enough people who are going to be like, wow, that really needed to be in 3D. Like, it's
Right.
people aren't going to get it really necessarily.
Right. Don't touch it. Yeah.
No. Honestly, if you want to do anything,
fans, it's gonna get pissed.
if you want to do anything, take this scan that you already have, see if you can't get a colorist to come in and fix some of those color grading issues that you have from film grade to film grade or camera to camera, whichever.
Yeah.
And do a really nice sort of like Criterion re-release like happened with Night of the Living Dead. You want to talk about how you're going to recoup some money off of the Dawn of the Dead film.
Yeah.
There you go. But
yeah, re-release it in 4K.
Yeah, easy. Slam dunk. There it is.
There it is. People would pay $20 a copy for that, $30 a copy, whatever those Criterion collections go for now. It's
oh yeah. Oh yeah. And you could even go and you can get it and get in on the whole like revitalization of like the VHS market, and you can go and do like little niche VHS releases of Dawn of the Dead. There are so many ways that you could take this thing and make some money off of it.
Never before seen set photos that we're going to include with this copy.
Boom. Easy.
Yeah.
Moving on, we now have the very different but at the core somewhat similar remake from 2004, Dawn of the Dead, and as always we have a clip, so take a listen.
Look up the road, there's a lot more of them. Why are they coming here?
Maybe they're coming for us.
Sooner or later, they're gonna get in here.
Our baby's gonna be fine.
It's only a matter of time.
It's coming. They'll find a way in.
Oh, God.
So, that was Dawn of the Dead, which is directed by Zack Snyder and written by James Gunn. The plot is a nurse, a policeman, a young married couple, a salesman, and other survivors of a worldwide plague that is producing aggressive flesh-eating zombies take refuge in a mega Midwestern shopping mall. And the film stars Sarah Polley, Ving Rhames, Mekhi Phifer, Jake Weber, Ty Burrell, Michael Kelly, Kevin Zegers, Lindy Booth, and those are really and a little appearance from Matt Frewer, and also a little cameo again from Tom Savini and several of the cast members from the original Dawn of the Dead as well. I guess I'll start off with this one, since you started on the last one. I also realized watching this that this is another movie that I had only seen from a certain point onward.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why both of these are somehow movies that I just like missed certain parts of. This I had missed like a considerably smaller portion of.
Right.
But I had definitely just somehow missed like the opening of this movie. So I really did not realize that like we started this movie so heavily with Ving Rhames and stuff like that. Like I was like, oh wow.
Yeah.
That opening.
It's a great opening. Great opening for a horror film.
And I had seen like the stuff that really had stuck with me was all of the later movie stuff, which is like, the zombie baby and things like that. All of that stuff that comes much later was more of what had stuck with me. but also
Right.
somehow the ending had completely not hit with me. So it was this
It
weird
was a new experience.
yeah, it was this weird pocket where I was like, man, I'm practically rewatching like a third to 2/3 of this movie for the first time. And overall, I really had a great experience. It's just as much kind of popcorn fun as Slither,
Mm-hmm.
but a much sleeker presentation.
I don't know. I think I might argue with that.
Okay.
And I think so. I want to backstep. I want to backstep a little bit with the opening. I've seen this movie so many times. It was one of my favorites growing up. I was 15 when it came out in 2004. So I probably snuck into a theater and watched it. And it really stuck with me for a long time. I bought it on DVD when it came out. I think I have a poster still up in my my mom's house in my bedroom. So I mean, it really, this movie does a lot for me. The one thing that I really noticed when I went back and rewatched it, I rewatched it again today, was that it was almost filmed with like an Instagram filter, right? Like the harshness of the coloring on this film is so strange.
Yeah.
And I think talking about presentation wise, that was almost like a distraction at points, especially with the vibrancy of the sky. There's one section where half the screen is green, the other screen is blue. And I was just like, that's just so jarring. It takes me out of the experience of watching a movie. I know I'm watching a movie now. Versus with Slither, Slither might be a lot lower budget. But I think James Gunn makes the most of that budget. And I think Zack Snyder, 2004, that's like the dawn of the digital age with filmmaking in general. I think he was just like, fuck it. Let's just throw up the saturation here. Let's throw up the contrast. Let's just mess around with all the stuff that we have at our disposal.
No, I think that's fair. I think it's sleeker. I'm not sure it's necessarily better.
Okay.
It's just, it has all of his, I noticed a few of his things that would later on become hard trademarks of his, so I noticed a few slow-mo shots that were a little gratuitous, but they were still very restrained, and I noticed, oh God, there was another one where I was like, oh yeah, that's Zach. But there are definitely some moments where I was like, no, I can see how this guy eventually, does a metamorphosis thing to eventually who he becomes. And what I'll say about Slither definitely has a very grounded, gritty, real approach that I think makes that movie wonderful. This movie is definitely the thing about Zack Snyder is, I think, whether it's early Zack Snyder or late Zack Snyder, he is always wanting to, in some way, hyper accentuate the fact that it is filmmaking that he is doing. And I think that can be a little isolating at times. I think it works better here because I think that James Gunn was his screenwriter, and James Gunn has a great way with words. I think he crafted a great script that allowed Zack Snyder to then go and do some of the stuff that he does best, which is add a little visual flair here and a little panache there, and truly direct the material. But I think that the good script is what kept a lot of him restrained.
Yeah, I've always said that Zack Snyder is very much like Rob Zombie as a director. And for me, I think it's more of like, artistically, I think they're brilliant in their own way. I think they just need someone surrounding them to rein them in. Like, we need you to focus because you're brilliant, but don't let the brilliance cloud your product.
No, absolutely. And I think that the issue is that the greater and greater success you get, so often the more and more the restraints come off. I think it was Jack White. I once heard or read an interview with him where he was talking about how on a certain level, he he preferred the early days of his career where he didn't have access to as many crayons in the box because he had to get more creative that way.
Right.
And I think that you always run the risk, success is a double-edged sword on a certain level. You get better, you get more notoriety, you get more access, you can do more. But now you no longer are having to think outside the box to create that same effect. You can just go and order it and it's done. And it can also, I think, disconnect you from your roots as a storyteller, on a certain level. And I think you see it happen a lot in film. I think it's a very hard I think it's a hard place to stay grounded, and I think you're right. You need people who keep you grounded and look at you and go, you can't do it. This scene has to go. It's not doing anything. It's gotta leave.
Yeah.
But overall, I really enjoyed this movie. The gore factor's up. The performances are really good.
You get running zombies, which if that's your thing, then for me it's a lot more terrifying.
Yeah, the zombies here are the absolute focus.
Yeah, you can't throw a pie in these faces of these zombies.
You're gonna get screwed.
Yeah.
And so they really, and that's, I guess, kind of your only choice with a zombie movie is you really, I think, have to either make it to where your zombies are your main threat, or your zombies are just a way for you to get to the person that you actually want to talk about, which is the threat of man.
Mm-hmm.
And here they absolutely get into no, zombies are the thing here.
And I think as a zombie fan, that's what I want. And that's why, we're going off on a tangent here, but that's why Walking Dead doesn't work for me, is because it's not about the zombies, it's about people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, that's the threat. Zombies aren't the threat. But when you have a truly terrific zombie film, I think it really is, no, zombies are the threat. And it's the same thing with the crazies. Like, of course you have the government who is
responsible.
The responsible one. So they're an antagonist, don't get me wrong, but your constant through line of antagonists are the zombies / crazies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who essentially are perpetuating this thing that was maybe caused by someone else, but they are now themselves the threat. They've now become consumed by it.
Mm-hmm.
They are now the threat themselves.
What I appreciated too with this version of the Dawn of the Dead is that they didn't completely abandon the consumerist themes, right? Like, they still have their apartment. They're still set up nicely. They're still trying to do regular everyday activities. Love the golfing scene, love the chess scene. And they didn't have to do shit to be like, you're going to care about Andy. You're going to care about this gun shop owner who you only see having a sign up the entire time.
Yeah.
You hear his voice on the radio when he gets bitten, but that's it. And all it really took was just for you to be like, oh, they're having a fun time. Now he's holding up a sign that says hungry. And that's all you needed to care about that character. And I think that that's the fascination with me with filmmaking is, and I think that's why film history is important. And when we look at a film like the old Dawn of the Dead, the 1978 version, and we don't have that character development, but it laid the groundwork for character development to be had in more modern times. And I think that's just, it's terrific. And we needed that foundation to be where we are today.
No, for sure. And, I think that even though I do love that opening bit from the first movie, James Gunn is smart when he decides we don't need it.
Right.
Start at the mall, essentially. Like, we jump to it real quick. We have some stuff outside of it, but comparatively speaking, it's like, swoop-a-doop, we're at the mall,
Let's talk about that opening, though, for the modern day one.
Yeah.
Because it struck me. Okay. And it wasn't even the fact that the kid came in and did, like, that was fine. That was cool. What got me was that this nurse came in wearing her scrubs that she's been in all day over time, and she just lays in the bed. The guy in the bed, he's already in the bed with his shoes on. I'm like, what? You guys need to clean these sheets. And
y'all are filthy. This is a plague.
You guys are so gross. That's what got me. And I was sitting there with my girlfriend, and she hadn't seen it before, and she made the comment, and I was like, oh my God, you're right. Like, that is so weird. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was just a very interesting way to start the movie.
No, I agree in it that ultra wide shot, that panoramic, sort of tilt is
Yeah.
fantastic. It's incredible. And I even enjoy, the sort of weird fisheye from behind the car tracking shot that we occasionally cut to.
Yeah.
There's some really good, interesting visuals on display. Um, Ultimately, I think I will rewatch both of these films for sure, but I will definitely be sort of rewatching the first one because I really enjoy the themes of the first one, and I also love some of how gritty and gnarly some of that original gore is.
Right.
And then I'll come to this one because this one has still some of those themes that I like, but is also just an absolute blast. And like the
It's a
second one,
fun movie.
yeah, the remake movie is definitely like a invite some people over and have a good time,
Right.
sort of a zombie movie.
Yeah, that's fair. The 1978 is, I'm going to appreciate this for what it did. And I'm still, like you said, like some people might have a great time looking at it now. It's just an audience. But I think if you were to look at it analytically,
Hmm.
it is a far superior movie to the remake.
Hmm.
But if you're looking at it as like, what do I want to have more fun?
Yeah,
You're going to have more fun watching the 2004 version.
yeah, for sure, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
So out of 5, what would you give the new one?
It's funny because as a 14-year-old kid, 15-year-old kid, I would have been like 5 out of 5. It was amazing. Watching it today, I think with the Instagram filter that I was talking about, there was I enjoyed Mekhi Phifer's storyline. I thought that was a great story plot.
I wanted more of it, honestly. I wanted to dig
Yeah,
deeper.
I wanted them to dig a little bit deeper. And like we were saying, I think before the podcast started, or maybe during, great ideas were presented, but they were just like failed executions at parts. I think that was definitely one of them where they could have done more. So I think I'd probably go 3.5.
Okay. I was honestly thinking about a 3.5 as well, just because it is a little thematically light, you
Yeah.
know. But still a great time. Still an
Yeah.
awesome movie.
Absolute blast. And for me, if you can get a 3.5, or I always do a 10 point, but if you can get into that like 7.5 range for a horror film, I think you're golden, especially when you're not dealing with heavy themes like religion or anything like that. I think you're doing a really good job.
No, absolutely. And, they were both great times for me and my wife. And so I think both of them are movies that, you can appreciate with groups of people, and others, just be definitely mindful of who you watch each of them with as well.
Right. Right. I do love very much so Ricardo Queso, Richard Cheese's version of Down with the Sickness. I was a big fan of that song when it came out. I adored him. I still listen to him. He has a fantastic rendition of WAP by Cardi B that you should definitely listen to, and it's hilarious.
That's worth noting.
But yeah, he's terrific. So I just wanted to plug him because for me, he's also part of the reason why this movie works so well, because of that soundtrack.
No, yeah, and James Gunn, again, I'm not sure how involved he was with some of this, but it definitely obviously had some influence from him, because the end credit song is the same opening credit song from The Suicide Squad most recently.
Yeah.
And so he definitely must have had some sort of, I guess he must just in general write the songs that he wants into it, just as a rule of thumb.
He probably does. Yeah. Oh, and before I forget, in the first film, the 1978 version, I did hear, I'm a big fan of Gorillaz. I don't know if you like the band, but there's an album called Demon Days, and they have an intro. And the intro from that album, I just found out, was played in the 1978 version of Dawn of the Dead. And I was like, oh my God, like they took that little segment and they put it at the start of their album. I just thought that was
and sampled
really
it.
cool.
Interesting. Interesting. No, there are, I think, a lot of surprising places where like movies and things like that and other media get sampled in rap. And of course, there's also the culture of sort of just name dropping, different pop culture icons throughout rap lyrics as well.
Yeah.
So, and music lyrics in general. So that's interesting. I'm trying to think, what else do we want to do? I mean, I guess we'll give the listeners. Last week I talked about the vote that was coming up for the IATSE strike. If you haven't been keeping up with it, yeah, it passed overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
Of the, I think it was like 80% of eligible voters that did vote, it's a 98% approval.
Yeah.
The Directors Guild of America also recently signed a letter saying that they are in solidarity with this strike. So a lot of pressure's on for the producers to really try and figure out something. They released a statement saying that they are still trying to come up with some sort of good faith agreement, and I'm like, man, they really have y'all in a pickle, and y'all really don't know how you're gonna get out of it yet. That's all I heard.
Yeah. Just pay your people, treat them like humans. It's pretty simple.
You know, once upon a time, I heard all of these stories growing up, from my grandfather about how he worked for this company and he worked there for so long and he would get like milestone gifts, like every 5 years, and he retired and he got a pension until the day that he died, even though the company like went under. And I'm not saying that we necessarily have to go all the way to pension level, but what the fuck happened in between?
Yeah. What happened to just acknowledging the good job that you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The humanity of it.
I didn't work, in entertainment or anything like that. I worked as a journalist. I won't name drop the station, but I was there for 3 years, and each year that I was there, I would get a little envelope. And I was like, "Ooh, what's this?" And in the envelope would be a small piece of candy and a baseball card. And I was there for 3 years, and let me tell you, there are people there who have been there a lot longer than me, and that is still all they get as recognition and thank yous. So it goes across the board,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Treat your people the way that you should be treating them, with respect, and just be like, we appreciate you. We appreciate the time and the devotion that you have done.
Yeah.
And I promise you'll get a better work ethic. People will want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, in the entertainment industry, you can get away with doing a lot more shady stuff because people move all the way across the country to be there and to be working on those types of productions. Like, that's what they want. So they're willing to take up with that bull crap that they're dishing for a little while, but eventually they will get burned out. And I think that's what happened.
Yeah. Well, and also, eventually, the other issue is that for so long, so much of, and I talked about this, I think, before as well, for so long, so much of Hollywood and working conditions at large across all types of jobs have been things that we just don't talk about. Don't talk about how much money you make, don't. And also, in certain cases, people have been forced into those situations through sometimes unreasonable non-disclosure agreements, that have kept a lot of secrecy, that has allowed a lot of abuse to be sheltered.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way from newsroom industry to how Hollywood treats its interns, and like how the people that ended up suing a group over an unlawful internship ended up not getting jobs in the media industry. They ended up getting blacklisted for it. So for years, there's just been rampant abuse overall. And so, yeah, once you burn people out and you treat people worse and worse, yeah, eventually people are going to get tired of it. And that's why at the same time that this strike is happening, you're also seeing Kellogg cereal workers just went on strike, and I'm not trying to get like overly preachy, but these are people that are hitting points of feeling unheard and overworked for too long.
Yeah. Too, I mean, it's just, I think when people have these dreams about going to Hollywood and, the financial success, I think, really still is a dream that people associate with Hollywood, whether it's working on any type of production or not. Like, I know someone who, he's worked on several Marvel productions. He's been like a PA on Marvel Productions. He's stepped it up. He's like now like the head PA. He's like over all the other PAs and all that stuff. And he might even be doing other things now, like with some directors. But I haven't talked to him in a little bit. But when I did talk to him, he was working on Infinity War, and he's been out in Hollywood now for almost a decade. Last I heard, he was living in a house with 8 different people. And it's not because I want to live in, like, he doesn't want to live in there with like 8 different people. It's because he doesn't make enough money, is what I'm guessing. Because I can't understand another reason why someone would want to live with 8 people.
No, and I know a guy, and his cousin is supposedly in the music industry and is pretty successful, and he's like in his 30s and has been out there for a while and is really on the come up, and he's got like 2 or 3 other 30-year-old roommates, And I think I mentioned this before. There was a guy that I knew who worked in the trailer industry. He'd been in Hollywood since the 90s. Well-connected guy, and he was living with his wife and 2 children who were high-need children, and they were living in a 2-bedroom apartment, in like Burbank or some shit, just crackerjack kind of stuff. And it's like, these kids definitely need like, better living conditions than, not that it was like a bad apartment. I'm not saying that like it was a bad apartment, but like at that point in your life, you should be at least in a small house, at this point in your life, in any other job.
And in your career. Yeah,
exactly. You'd be in a small house,
It's crazy. It's crazy. And they know that they can keep dangling these people because of what they do. Oh, but look at the stuff that you're working on. Look at the stuff. Like, aren't the people that you are close to proud of you for what you've done? Isn't that amazing? And it's like, well, financially, it doesn't really show. Like, yes, my name is in the credits of this big blockbuster movie. That's amazing. But am I seeing any residuals from that? Am I getting any kind of financial reward for that? Transitioning real fast, I do want to talk about your last episode because I listened to it.
Yeah.
Because I love Death Proof, love Planet Terror. I thought those were wonderful.
Yeah.
So I saw it opening night.
Okay.
I was 17, 18 years old when it came out. Saw it opening night, went at midnight. Watched Planet Terror, had an absolute blast, right? Like you guys talked about that. It was a very fun ride. That's again an hour and a half, hour 45-minute movie, right? So it's 1:45 in the morning. We have another trailer right before Death Proof. It's about 2 a.m. when this movie starts. And when it started rolling, I was hyped. Saw Quentin Tarantino coming off that Kill Bill 2. And I'm like, this is going to be so good. So good. And then it was just so much dialogue. So much dialogue. And I'm fairly certain I fell asleep in parts of that. And that was the movie I was the most hyped for, right? Because, it's Quentin Tarantino. I love Robert Rodriguez, love Desperado, The Faculty, From Dusk Till Dawn. Terrific filmmaker. But I was there for Quentin. And to fall asleep during one of my favorite filmmakers' movies, it deeply disturbed me after I left, because I was like, I shouldn't have done that. But for me, I love Death Proof more than Planet Terror. Planet Terror is such a fun ride. It's so good. I don't remember his name, but you do, I think. The protagonist with the biker.
Freddie Rodriguez, El Rey.
Freddie Rodriguez, yeah. Loved him, thought he was terrific. Rose McGowan.
Are you a wrecker, Ray?
She was my celebrity crush for the longest time. I really hate the path that she has taken today, but she was amazing back then. And
great in Scream.
Great in Scream. Scream is my favorite slasher film of, it's probably one of my favorite horror films, if not my favorite. So, I love that film dearly. But Death Proof was so bold in what it did. And by taking, the 2 different storylines, mashing them together in a way that felt organic, but also it did feel like 2 different films, but it works. Somehow he managed it to work. The problem is it's not a grindhouse film.
No, not at all.
It's not a grindhouse film. Planet Terror is a grindhouse film, even with the missing reels and the cigarette burns on the film. All of it is there. Death Proof is just, it's a fun movie that you're going to watch and you know it's a Quentin Tarantino dialogue.
Yeah, it's a Quentin movie, and I truly stand by that. I definitely think he sort of lost sight of what the homework project was a little bit.
They chose the wrong filmmaker. That's
Yeah.
not his style.
No,
They were. I get it. They're friends, but you should have. Robert Rodriguez should have went to someone else.
it should have been Edgar Wright. You know,
Edgar Wright would have been terrific. Rob Zombie would have been terrific.
mm-hmm.
Quentin Tarantino is Quentin Tarantino. He makes his own films.
Yeah.
You
And,
can't box.
Maybe he should have. Maybe he could have gone out and, I'm not sure if George would have been up to doing it, but maybe it could have been interesting to have the new generation of kind of,
The Gecko Brothers?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about? The George Clooney?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But go and get Romero to come in and see if he would want to do, the second half of it. And then he could have had Rodriguez and Romero, and it could have been old and new. These could have been other options, but
yeah,
Pat's not taken.
Yeah. No, I agree. Or it could have just been, Quentin, have a ball with this. Like, I think it was too constrained of an idea with having, Kurt Russell killing people in his car. Like you said, I think it was a great, in a way, it is a slasher, with the way that it's handled. But I think the idea was just so small in comparison to what Planet Terror was. Like, Planet Terror was this grand scale idea. Even though it's kind of simple, if you think about it, it's still grand in scale because of all the stuff that it does. But like, if you had him say, like From Dusk Till Dawn just felt like two different films, right? You have the Gecko Brothers, and then you have the Titty Twister. Go back and be like, okay, so what happens to George Clooney? Get George Clooney in 2007 to reprise that role. That would have been insane.
Yeah. That would have. Oh, George. He wouldn't do it now either.
No, they missed out. They missed out. And I will never forgive them for not revisiting that character, because it would have been great.
It would have been.
Him and El Rey, I think that would have been terrific. But
oh, that could have been fun.
Yeah.
No. That would have been really good.
And I do disagree with you. Werewolf Women of the SS, that's my movie that I'm sold on. I hate that movie never got made, because Nick Cage is Fu Manchu. I'm here for it. Here for it all day long.
I honestly wouldn't have minded all of them being made.
Yeah.
I think that they,
like you said, would have been terrific too.
That I think is one that really had a lot of commercial viability, because also, like, we don't have a Thanksgiving movie. Could have been this one.
I know.
Oh well.
I know. But Don't would have been good too. But yeah, like you said, all of them.
Yeah. Well, I think that's pretty much all that I have. Sky, do you want to tell the people where they can find you and do a little shameless self-promotion?
I am off the grid.
Okay.
I'm on. You can follow me on Twitter. I don't know my Twitter handle. That's how much I use social media. But
I'll link all of Sky's things, his podcast and everything in the description.
It's great, and I do have a podcast of my own that my co-host would shame me forever if I didn't plug it. So we have a podcast called The Weekly Pop-Up. It is terrific. My goal is, because my co-host, one of them, is a little scared of horror films. So I would love for Paul to come on and discuss something. I don't know yet. Maybe Ari Aster, maybe from Hereditary and Midsommar. I think he really is coming up as the king of horror.
Okay.
As well as Flanagan. Mike Flanagan is just, he's
got
proven
Flanagan
so much.
You've got Eggers, you've got
James Wan,
Aster, James Wan. We've got some good ones working right now.
Yeah, it really is kind of like this golden age of horror right now with these talented filmmakers. So, but yeah.
No, hell yeah, man. I'd love to come on. So just let me know whenever.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you, Film Buds, for listening. That's been the show. Next week is, I think, Hispanic Heritage Horror, which is going to have Kronos and Tigers Are Not Afraid, I think
Still
is
wanna
what
see
it's
that one.
called. And so that should be a good one. I think we're going to have Nick Delgadillo on for that one. Check the socials. And also, if you haven't already, earlier this week, I posted Club Girl, a little zombie movie that I made in college. So if you haven't, go and give that a little watch. And I also have a little post about the making of that movie from my experience, and I'll link that as well. It's been a blast, guys. Keep listening, like, subscribe, spread the word, and have a good evening. Bye.